past for some of the older ones. So there are some issues at the high school gymnasium that tonight we just wanted to make the EFPBC generally aware of, and then I'm going to hand it off to Jay to kind of give a little more detail. But going back to 2014, when the high school project was in the early stages of eligibility, there was some discussion with the EFPBC about just how inclusive the scope would be of the project, particularly with respect to the gymnasium. There was some discussion about the condition of the gymnasium floor, that parquet floor, which wasn't great. And whether or not that should be replaced as part of the high school project. But the committee felt at that time it didn't make sense to do it. They're primarily just out of concern for scope and cost. You know, the high school project wound up being $129 million bucks. And there were other items too, like a suspended running track that would have been awesome, hung from the deck above. So we would have like this interstitial level for indoor track. That didn't happen either. So the decision was made not to include it, but understanding eventually the floor would need to be replaced. And then my recollection, Jay, it was sort of like around maybe phase 3, by the time we had everything bought out, it came up again. The superintendent raised it as a question, but given some of the issues the committee was already dealing with at the time, there was some discomfiture towards making a major investment in replacing the floor and maybe running out of contingency. And even at that time, it was understood it was going to be significant 6 figures. So once again, the committee took a pass. Fast forward to sometime around 2018, our athletic director, Mark Aria, continued to be concerned about the deterioration of the floor, and also began to kind of question like the orientation of the gym and some of our athletic equipment, and reached out to a vendor to not only replace the floor, but possibly move some of the equipment in the room, came up with some initial quotes, and brought that forward. And I might, Jay, hand off to you at this point just to share like what the reaction was to that, what you did with it, and then I'd like to just sort of share with the committee really what's happened in the past month. But maybe you can bring everybody up.
Sure. I mean, you hit it on the head. The only difference was we looked at the quote that was brought, and it was really just to do the athletic side of it, and sprinkler, electrical, other items were not included in it. So we did get some money and approve a rail study, which Meg hired an architect, and we got a cost estimate. It came back at that time, I'm just saying roughly, I think it was 1.3 million to do it correctly. And that's where it ended at that point, because the real number, we were floating around the 600,000, like you said, but it was really in the 1.3 at that time to do it correctly.
Importantly, that was like 2019. That was right before COVID blew up and kind of shut everything down. And one of the things our athletic director has expressed interest in is, if you will, turning the room, turning the court 90 degrees. We continue to have trouble running multi-sport contests in that space to the extent that the MIAA, I think, will not host like postseason play at the Winchester gymnasium. So I think a lot of this is well-intentioned, but given either, the cost, but also the fact that COVID happened and we were suddenly trying to figure out how to teach kids remotely, it kind of died. And it lay dormant for a while. Now I'm going to fast forward. As some of you know, I sit on the capital planning committee. So about a month ago, about 4 weeks ago, the select board chair asked capital what it might prioritize if the select board were to take $2 million from free cash and give it to the capital planning committee. What projects would we prioritize, particularly what might be shovel ready? There was a particular question, I think, about the high school gym and what would that priority be. So Frank, as superintendent, and we talked with Meg, we talked with Pete, we checked in with the school committee chair, and because the high school gym, frankly, has never actually come forward to the school committee table. I mean, all this discussion has kind of been like internal to the district, and then once upon a time it was with the EFPBC. It's nothing the school committee could put any priority on, because frankly, as a committee, we don't really fully understand the problem. We don't really understand what the options are, and we certainly don't understand what the costs are. So what we agreed to do, and we discussed at the school committee table last week, is it's time to get, we will have an internal meeting with the athletic director and with folks like with Jay and with Chris, with Peter, with Frank. The chair of capital has an interest in this as well, and with Meg, to kind of get this band back together and have another meeting with Mr. Aria, understand once again what the concerns were, I'm hearing through the grapevine he may have some different ideas than what he had in 2019, and that may kind of change the solution a little bit. I don't know if that makes it more affordable or more expensive, but certainly given where inflation has gone, we'd have to update the numbers. So what was good was the report, that this detailed report that was prepared included a cost estimate from Peter Bradley. So that name should be familiar to everybody. Peter's firm is doing the estimate for TAP A on the Lynch project. So, and he's done a lot of work in Winchester. So, high degree of confidence in his work, but that's just an old number now. So what we wanted to do was sort of make the committee aware that this is an issue. The school committee would like to understand, let's say by May, what the issues are, what the options are. There may be two. I mean, it may just simply, there may be a baseline option, which is what does it take to just replace the floor? And as I remember it, Jay, that includes like pouring like a low density concrete layer in or something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of structural analysis that was done. As a baseline, it might be replacing the floor, but that could be $800,000 or $900,000. And the soup to nuts option today may be $2.5 million. So before the school committee can even have that conversation in May, to understand it, we need to understand really more clearly what the options are, what the costs are, and frankly, like, does the EFPBC have thoughts and a recommendation? So no vote tonight. There's really nothing really to share. I mean, there is a detailed report, but we didn't feel like it made sense to share it because Mr. Aria may have like some different ideas that kind of make that report moot. But we just wanted to kind of make everybody aware of it. And I wondered, Jay, if either Pete or Chris could just speak to not just the condition of the floor, but there are equipment issues too, like the bleachers, which obviously travel back and forth on the floor, that continue to be a growing concern.
I'll let Chris take over because he's more closer to it. It's been pretty historic, though, that when the floor went down, the bleachers themselves weren't compatible with the soft floor. That's been a long-standing issue. But any more on the day-to-day, I'm going to leave it to Chris to talk about.
Okay. So yeah, we have sort of, I think there's two roads here, right? There's the condition of the current gym equipment, floor, and then there's the suitability of the layout and materials and stuff. And I wouldn't be comfortable speaking to the suitability of that for use moving forward. But as far as the condition of the equipment and the flooring, and there's two layers of floor there, the most recent one and then the one previous to that. There are a significant amount of bubbles that have happened around, and the PE teachers have kind of gotten down to a bit of a routine as far as making some short-term improvements to it or repairs to it. But the bleachers continue to be a pretty significant issue, and there's several issues with the bleachers. One, they're old. They're straight up just very old, and they've been in and out a lot over the years. And the suitability of the bleachers and the floor is definitely an issue. The resilient floor that the flooring is, and the type of wheels, type of bleachers, they don't really go too well together. And the bleachers settle into the floor when they're in an out position. And then when they tried to go to an in position, they're really pretty unhappy about that, because you can guess that, there's 20 or so wheels that have settled into this resilient floor and have to come out of that valley or all of those valleys to get moving. We've had problems with drive shafts snapping, gearboxes breaking. And then on top of that, the bleachers are not in the layout that they were in before. And I was not here, so this is just what I've been told. They're not in the layout that they were prior to
Vivian, that may be.
The bleachers are not in the original-ish configuration. So, for instance, the bleachers that are on the north side of the gym cannot be pulled out to a full extension where they would lock in place, because when pulled out to a full extension, they extend into the field of play. So they can only come out about 3/4 of the way, which is not really the way they're designed and should be used. So they're brought out partially and then have to be brought out and put back when there aren't people there. So overall, we have, we have 2 sections of bleachers right now that are down. We're waiting on some information from the vendor that Mark was using to see if we can get them repaired. One was repaired about a year ago, and the other one has just recently broken. But we can't extend them safely. It takes the whole crew of custodians to move them out right now. The drive wheels just don't work. So I think that's probably the long and short of it around the gym, unless anybody has any questions. But those are sort of the high points of the issues that we're experiencing basically on a daily basis.
So the firm that Meg found that we contracted with was the same firm that did the Parkhurst elevator project, and that was a very difficult project. I think we were reasonably happy with them. They're very thorough. We've got a lot of good information in terms of existing conditions. So this is really not about starting from scratch so much as it is, as I said, getting the band back together and kind of say to Margaria, okay, one more time, help us understand, what are the issues? I think it'd be helpful if we can come up with maybe a middle option. I mean, I think at a baseline, we've got to do something about the floor. And, if Mark could have everything he wanted, what would that look like? And is there something in the middle? But we just need to get that process going. And I want to also be really clear, there's not the kind of money left in the contingency to actually pay to do the work. But the hope is here, just like we did for the bathroom project last summer, we might be able to fund basically an updated study and cost estimate, Meg, and then, then just be able to talk about what this looks like with more confidence. Because if this goes forward, it's going to have to be a capital project. It'll go through, summer cycle discussion and, might come up at fall town meeting. I guarantee there will be other projects that'll be important. I mean, this is the same group that looks at ambulance and fire truck replacement and police cruisers and fixing bridges. So not necessarily an easy path ahead.
I have one question, Chris. I guess to the best of my recollection, there was a study done in the past. I guess, does everyone have a copy of that report? Just making sure, because I guess I heard, the school committee wasn't aware. To the best I could remember was, they came to the committee at EFPBC and, maybe the channel they were given is still through the EFPBC. That's all I can think of to, best put the blame on us. So maybe,
okay. I think you were in the process of logging in. Yeah, we had talked about that. We do recognize you have the report. We're actually holding off on distributing it because the athletic director may have some different ideas about the orientation.
That's fine,
of the room.
as long as Meg has shared the report with the school committee. That's all I wanted. There was a study done in the past, correct?
Right.
Yeah, just to be clear, the school committee never actually discussed this, but we would need to advance it, as an interest. And look, if Margaria says, oh yeah, no, I'm good, that this still kind of reflects what I'd like to do, then we might actually distribute that report. So we have all that information, but we basically just need to update everything. Jenny, I see Frank has his hand up.
Go ahead, Frank.
No, I would just add to, and this was kind of, I think, either said explicitly or Chris kind of hinted at, we're kind of getting to a point where we are like, not unlike the turf field, we are getting to the point where this is starting to become a safety issue. For our kids, both in physical education, but it's also becoming an issue for us in terms of actually for the season. So I mean, the timeline is a timeline. I appreciate. I know that Mark, and I probably can speak for Chris also, and Peter, appreciate getting this in your radar at this point, so it can begin to have a conversation that wherever this lands, it lands. But it is a little bit analogous to me to the turf field that was just replaced as well. So just to put that out there.
No, you're 100% right, Frank. When we were wrapping up the high school, the architect informed us that the floor was at its end of life and it was only a 10-year floor. they said that they told us at the beginning of the job also. I searched meeting minutes and everything. I couldn't find anything saying that, but so we've well extended the life of that floor right now. So I can see the problems. All right, Vivian, we're going to move into the new Lynch. Are you ready? Are you all set? I think we lost her again.
She may not be. She's not been able to get audio. That she's not been able to hear us, and then she can hear us, so we can't hear her. She's not been able to coordinate both settings. So I'm not sure.
She was going to go over her budget, and then we're jumping into the modulars with her also, and then the Parkhurst site. You want to jump to the Parkhurst while we?
Probably makes sense.
Vivian?
I'm back. I think.
Gotcha.
Maybe, I'm sorry if I'm a little bit distorted, but I'm trying to do this on my iPad.
Okay.
And, but I can't project.
Yeah. So Vivian, do you want me to? I can share screen and show the committee where your summary is. We can hit 2 birds with 1 stone.
Please, if you don't mind.
No, I'm happy to do that. Everybody, just give me a second. Okay. So, as we said at the last meeting, I would add this folder. So if you go to the project drive under MSBA Module 5, which is where a lot of our project documents are with the MSBA, there's a new folder here called Monthly Scope and Budget Summaries. And if you open that, you'll find Winchester Budget Dashboard. And so this is the report that we indicated. You have Vivian or someone from Hill. If Vivian can't be with us, we'll get an update from them at the first meeting of every month. So Vivian, take it away. And if you need me to zoom or pan, or if people have trouble seeing this, please let me know. I mean, I've blown it up. I can see the whole thing on my screen, but I'm happy to move around if people need me to. Can you see that, Vivian?
I can. I actually have it on my computer, on my laptop, that I can't seem to join Zoom on, but I'm going to go between 2 screens. So apologies if I look like I'm not looking at you, but I'm trying to read myself. So this is a dashboard that we created, and the dashboard is not a standalone. So this has a lot of different files and reporting structure that ties into this dashboard. So the bottom half, I'll go through each portion, but the bottom half where you see a high-level project financial overview has many of the other items that you're familiar in seeing from the MSBA, the project funding agreement. All of the line items roll up into this. So granted, it's only a few line items, but all of the fields and the lines go into it. I'll start from the very top. In the top box where it states project major accomplishments in February, thank you. There is where we'd like to identify all of the major accomplishments, granted not all of the nuances, but the major accomplishments that we already as a project achieved in February, such as the programming meetings have been held for the Lynch Elementary School. There are still a few ongoing ones, but the bulk of them with the teachers have been held. We're also further developing the design development documents, and they were sent out to the cost estimators. The PFA package was also finalized and submitted to the MSBA. I have not heard any response back that it was incomplete. So Meg, great job. Also, we've been working with the Parkhurst modulars and developing the design and having meetings and making sure that the progress is moving forward. In the next category, we'd like to capture and give you a high level of the tasks we plan to achieve for this month and going forward. As I mentioned, the design development documents are already with the cost estimators. So we hope to have a cost estimating meeting and reconciliation later this month. But we'll look forward to finalizing the design development documents and making a submission to the MSBA at the end of this month. Parkhurst upgrades, we're also working towards finalizing the plans and specs. And for the modulars, mobilizing of the contractor through Triumph Modular later, I believe closer to April timeframe. In the other categories, we'll highlight some of the current issues and areas to focus, if there are any, along with any photos and updates that we can provide. Granted, we don't have any groundbreaking or anything significant at the Lynch Elementary School, so we incorporated a site plan as a progress photo for where the modulars will be at Parkhurst. In the lower middle categories is the schedule summary. Again, this is a schedule that we have incorporated just the highlights and the major activities and not all of the detail that is encompassing the project schedule. The first line, you'll notice the first grouping is for the Lynch Elementary School. Second grouping is for the Parkhurst upgrades. And the third group is for the Parkhurst modulars. Since all of these are different activities, we're tracking them separately. I'll go with the first grouping of the Lynch Elementary School. As I noted, based on our schedule start, we had design development cost estimating going into the cost estimators on February 21st. And we achieved that very closely and sent out on the 23rd. So the cost estimators are currently working on the drawings, putting together a design development cost review for us as a project team with TAP A and Hill to review respectfully with our cost estimators and come together to do a reconciliation before we bring it forward to this committee. We've also tried to identify any scope changes from the original scope in this dashboard. Some of them, as we get further along, will come off this list and new ones will come on. But at the moment, the only approvals we had last month was the Parkhurst modulars of PCO1 and PCO2. And for amendments on the second half are Hill International's amendment number 3 and TAP A Architects amendment number 4 and 5. If there's any budgetary transfers that are made, we will identify them in the box adjacent to the scope changes. But given that there hasn't been any, there are none identified. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, the project financial overview, this is by no means what we track and only what we track. These are the very high level, rolled up all the information into these categories such as construction, design, administration. We did break out the swing space and the modular so that everyone can see and have exposure to that line item, as well as the FF&E technology. Below the line, you will see the construction contingency, which is the hard cost contingency, as well as the soft cost contingency, where it totals to the overall budget amount, project amount. In the categories, we have approved budget, committed costs. Those are the ones where the amendments have already been approved and the PCOs have either been if not PCOs, more of contracts have been signed. Uncommitted is what remains from the approved budget. And the forecast is what we will use as we move forward and the project develops, where I anticipate using the funds that are available. So I will already carry them as being committed. So I don't think that I have in the project budget overall more money than there actually is. The expenditures to date are the invoices that have been issued and approved. We will never do it in advance to your approval. And the balance to spend is exactly that, what we have to spend remaining for the duration of the project. Next to it, we've also included a cash flow for the project where expected and anticipated, as well as the red being the actual. So right now we are trending on track. And as the project continues, we will monitor this in order to make sure that we have proper cash flow for the project. I'll take a moment. I'm positive there's going to be questions, and I'm happy to answer any that you have.
Can I, Vivian, can I also just ask you real quickly? I think part of what you wanted to share with us tonight is, let me make this go away real quick. We have a document, here we go. I think committee members have seen this. There are some, detailed budget spreadsheets that kind of roll it up into some of those numbers that Vivian just described. But can you just take a moment, Vivian, to describe, you have sort of this level of detail, right, that informs that summary sheet, and you're in a position to share, this with us. I mean, you don't have this tonight, but I think the intention moving forward is that we can have this level of detail or something like it as well available to the committee, right?
So this is this sheet that you guys are all familiar with is provided by the MSBA, and where this is a still document. So we take the information that was provided by the MSBA. We have a similar document with all of the same line items created for us that roll up into this project summary sheet. We have all of this level of detail, and we track every single nuance that the MSBA is looking for, and including the cost codes for them when we make a submission for reimbursables. My hope is, and this is what I'm working towards, if you could go back to that, Chris, I apologize, that for the next month, moving forward, we not only provide you with this executive level summary, but we also give you a little bit more nuance and detail than this bottom half. This is a good snapshot in time for you to see where we are very quickly in financial on a one sheet document. But for those that need or require or wish to have a little bit more detail, we're working to set up a separate workbook or a separate sheet that gives you a lot more of the detail, but not necessarily every single detail, because I don't want anyone getting lost in all of it. Just give you the most of it as that is useful for you, and the others will remain tracking on our end.
And I can leave this up if folks have questions.
Looks like Brian has a question. Brian?
Yes. I really like this dashboard, Vivian. This is great. Is there a any ability or anything that's not too difficult to put together, which is like a visual version of the whole schedule? I really like that actual versus estimated cash flow graph, like something kind of like Gantt chart like. Do you have something like that which you're able to share too?
We have a full project schedule that is a Gantt chart created. I couldn't incorporate that into this document because then the file, it's just too large to share.
Separate page or something.
Right, and we can give you that as a project schedule, an overview of the project schedule. Absolutely, that I can do separately great. And not independent of this dashboard. I kind of tried incorporating the milestone dates that are what we're working towards in the next upcoming, months, in this middle section where it's the schedule. But if you're looking for the overall project schedule, happy to share that.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great like page 2 to this. Just, I think it's helpful. This is a really neat dashboard.
I'll work towards trying to make it a little bit more of a roll-up schedule so that it doesn't have too much of the detail, and do it as a second page as a PDF. Sure.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great suggestion.
A quick question, Vivian. The PCO2, I believe it came from some kind of a contingency, correct? So where would it?
No, it did not. Okay. We did not use contingency dollars for PCO2, which is for the Parkhurst modulars. It was taken out of the swing space because we still have funds available in that category. So we wouldn't take it out of contingency until we need it.
Okay. All right.
The same is true of PCO number 1.
Correct.
Okay.
But Vivian, your detail, which you don't have for this meeting, but like for the April meeting, your detailed backup sheet would sort of speak to some of those questions, right? I mean, you would see if we're hitting the contingency or not.
Yes. This one you could easily detect as well that we have not hit the contingency, because I have not, there's no dollars allocated to the committed costs section, and the balance to spend is still the same from the baseline budget. So nothing has touched any of the hard costs or soft cost contingencies.
And so for the committee's benefit, when Vivian, I think the plan is Vivian and her team will prepare these like on a Monday afternoon before our EFPBC meeting. And just like sometimes Don will send out meeting minutes in advance, I will make every effort to get this uploaded to the project drive in that folder that I showed everybody. And I'm just going to change the name of the file. So for instance, you will find this one, it'll be named something obvious like March 23, and next month's just going to be April 23. And they're just going to live in the folder, and that's where you can go. So you can see the current one, and you can look backwards if you want to.
Any other questions for Vivian? Nope. All right, moving on to Modular Triumph from, I think we're asking Meg to give a quick update. It's probably not much, but just how you doing?
Sure. So Triumph is still, excuse me, working on finalizing their design. They made some changes to the modular layout after they completed their survey of the site. And they sent that around Friday or today, rather, to have everybody look at. They are still on schedule to get out and mobilize the end of March. And the first thing that they'll be working on after they set up all their, their fencing and everything will be to pour the transformer pad and put in the conduit for the primaries. And once they do that, Eversource will then come out and do whatever it is they do to hopefully get that transformer out there on time. So I'm just awaiting. I'm waiting for the invoice from Eversource. So I hope to have that in the next day or two, and then I'll bring that to the next meeting, and we'll get an authorization to pay that. And that is about it for that. Do you want me to update on the Parkhurst as well?
Yeah, sure.
So that's currently out to bid. We have a pre-bid meeting on Thursday at 9 a.m. out at the site. The file subbids are due on the 23rd, and then the general bid opening is April 6th. So far, that's all on schedule. We don't foresee any reasons to have to change that, but we'll know more as we go through the process. But so far, so good.
Were you able to check, Meg, on how many people picked up drawings so far?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how many. I would say 4 or 5. Well, that's not true. Maybe 3 or 4 general contractors. The rest are
subs,
the trades. So I did send out an email today to a few contractors and sent them a copy of the advertisement just to give them a heads up. A lot of times people don't pick up anything until after the pre-bid. So hopefully come Friday, we'll have some more interest in the project.
Okay, so that's a site, and that hit Eversource too at the same time.
Yeah.
So can you hit on the wellfield decommissioning?
Sure. So last Tuesday, we had a meeting, VHB and myself, and we met with a representative from MEPA. And we explained the entire project to them, and it was determined that we have to prepare and submit an expanded ENF and hopefully a rollover EIR, which is a shorter process. And so VHB is putting together their fee proposal and timeline for doing that. Once, and I expect to have that in the next day or two, and I'll bring it to the EFPBC. I may try to get permission to do that sooner because I really would like to get that submitted. I'm a little confused about the actual timing on the process, but once it's submitted, there's a 120-day process. So we are hopeful that we could have this permit in hand by the end of August, early September. So I'll know more once I get the fee proposal and the timeline from VHB, and I can share that at our next meeting.
Any questions for Meg? No. Okay. Lynch progress from Charlie.
Charlie, that's your handoff. You should be able to share screen.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And good evening. Let's see here. So hopefully that's now going to appear magically in front of you. Does that appear magically in front of you?
Not yet.
Oh, bummer. Let's see here.
It's all on you. You're good to share. So I want to hear you complain about the host.
It's all about the operator, not the technology, typically. Certainly in my case, it is. Okay, so today was going to be an exterior view update. You know, everyone got a little bit of a sneak peek of the exterior when I presented the sort of conceptual solar canopy renderings a month ago or something, but that was really focused much more squarely on the kind of the experience of being on site with those canopies in various locations and what that would feel like, and the fact that that's how we were going to propose their locations. This is much more focused simply on the building. So I'm just going to walk you around the building. You're certainly welcome to ask questions or comment if you wish. I would say there isn't anything that's dramatically and radically different, so I don't think any of it's not going to look like a different building to you. But we have kind of updated a lot of it, and we have more sort of focused views on a lot of it. This would be kind of the view as you were arriving on the western kind of vehicular bus car loop, drop-off loop, and you'd see the main entrance in front of you. You see the art classroom above the main entrance. You see the cafeteria to the left. You see the library to the right. And the hope is that the library is going to offer some sort of sheltered area that we can put benches and something like that for a place for kids to wait and hang out. So this is kind of the view you'd get from the south looking north towards that part of the building. The material palette is very similar. There's Trespa panel in a limited amount. There's a fair amount of brick, and there is some kind of Ariscraft sort of longitudinal kind of shaped pieces in various locations, which is kind of the gray. There's metal panel for roof edges, of course, metal panel in places where we don't want to try to hang brick. And so that's kind of the intended palette. This is the same view, but as you turn your head to the right and you're looking at the playground in front of the building, you're looking at the library again, but then beyond it, you're looking at the classroom wing kind of fading away to the right. And you no longer kind of see the cafeteria to your left. But of course, as we all know, it's quite a long building, so it kind of goes off there into the mist. This is the pre-K entrance. So here you're seeing to your left the three-story classroom wing. To your right, you're seeing the outdoor classroom, which is on the third level, or the roof of the second level. And the solar canopies up there above the structural steel that could in future become an addition. We did talk about that last time I presented images, so that hasn't changed dramatically. Again, you're seeing brick, you're seeing Trespa, which is the lighter brown. The brick is more the sort of terracotta color. The gray is the Ariscraft. This is as much of it as windows as possible. Some of it is curtain wall. Curtain wall has a higher cost point, but we have some of it. We were trying to keep as much with windows as we can. And of course, we're trying to control the fenestration without compromising sort of the interior experience and the views. And we had talked about the smaller bays. Those are along the base. You can see them. You'll see them, I think, in a more pronounced way on the back. This is as if you were arriving from the east and going across the bridge. You see that classroom wing again. You see the two-story wing with the roof above with the solar panels on it. And then you see one of the two stairs that rises to the roof that has windows in it, which is nice because at the end of the corridors, you can actually see out and see glass. So that was the intent there. We have shaped the roof just to try to reduce the scale as best we can. The fact of the matter is these are quite tall because they're really four-story structures. We have a three-story building with a four-story stair, but that's really the only way to get to the roof. Obviously, the other one is hidden, but the one at the end is not. So because we have two of them, which was the request, it's relatively tall. That the roadway that goes around to the right is the sort of what is really now the pre-existing gravel pathway that goes down to the fields and what would become a service road. And the fact of the matter is a lot of this would actually in reality be obscured by trees, because anything to the right of that car and in front of that roadway is actually remaining trees. So this is the convenience of the rendering to show the end of the building, but in fact a lot of it would be obscured.
Charlie, real quick, do we have any bird control provisions in this building? I'm a little concerned. Just
the birds are important. They give it that kind of naturalistic feel we're looking for.
Yeah, well, we better get a power washer then. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
Okay, they're gonna love it underneath those solar panels.
Yeah, the solar panels you should actually be worried about. This is the rear. As I said, you kind of start to see the more sculptural character of the walls on the rear. They're on the front too, but these renderings show them off more on the rear. So here you're getting the two kind of classroom blocks, and then in the far background is the gym to the right. Again, that stair over in the foreground to the left. Youngest students on the first floor, lower elementary on the second floor, upper elementary on the upper floor. And then here's a view from the soccer field. Well, I don't know if it's soccer, the recreational play fields. Looking up the hill, you see the gym on the right, you see those classroom wings on the left, and you can see the hill rising on the right, which already does. And again, some of this will ultimately be obscured by trees as well. Here to the right-hand side, actually a lot of it is tree lined, but for the convenience of the rendering, you don't see that as much. Again, it's a combination of the brick and the trespa and the aircraft. So there are very specific places where each of these things appear in terms of classroom versus kind of core space versus service and circulation. And then this is the kind of overhanging roof we're interested in trying to do at the west side over a small playground outside the gym. And we kind of thought of it with the intent of creating more roof space for more roof panels. And then in talking about it further, we thought, well, not only that, but it'd be a great place for kids to play outdoors in inclement weather. So if you had a crappy day and you still want to get kids outdoors, potentially they could play under this big overhanging roof. It is not, this feature is not in the schematic design cost estimate. So one of the things we're going to find out is whether we can actually afford it. But we've gone ahead and sort of created the view of it, put it into the drawings. It is in the drawings that the estimators are looking at, and we'll see what happens. But it obviously would be one of the things that could end up on the cutting room floor if we're struggling with budget. Of course, another thing that was not in the estimate at schematic was the pedestrian bridge. It was shown as an alternate. So there are some things that may drive up our cost, and we'll just have to see how that goes. So fingers crossed that we do okay. And then coming back around the corner, you're seeing the west side of the cafeteria with a small outdoor area that you kids can get out to, and some glazing into the cafeteria so you can see into it and out of it, with the parking on the right. That's that. Again, we're back to that, the bus car loop, and this on the right, that roadway is the entrance from the west side of the site. And then that's the view with this is the one view where we left kind of those solar canopies in the view because they're over that parking lot. But this is as if you were entering the site, and you're seeing that overhanging roof, you're seeing the cafeteria, etc. So that's kind of all the ones we have for today. And obviously we're going to, keep developing them. Mark?
Yeah, two questions, Charlie. Thanks for the presentation. First question is underside of the soffits. Is that trespa as well?
No, I think all of that is metal.
Okay.
Well, unless it's rendered as trespa, but I don't think it should be.
It's like not
no,
dark.
It would be probably metal. It's just easier to do it that way.
Okay. It's just colored as if it's like the Trespa.
Yeah,
That's what I was
good call. That was
curious.
something I didn't catch.
And second question is, did you include any provisions for an on-site mock-up?
Well, our specs always call for mock-ups for sure. I mean, usually we do one or two, and it's always a struggle. And what we have found over many years is that we almost never get a mock-up for color. We can get a mock-up for constructability, and we usually can get a mock-up for masonry, but the window people usually say, we got a white window and a green window available. We'll put those in for you, but we can't get you what you want. So, you know, it's always a struggle. But yes, we do ask for a mock-up, and it's really important for constructability too.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions on this? No.
I have a comment or a question if
Sure.
Somebody else has one. So, Charlie, thank you. It's a great presentation. I wonder, and again, I know this is very early, in some areas, and this really struck me when you're approaching from the east, when you come off the bridge and you see that 4-story stair structure, it's adjacent to, thank you, that's a large expanse of masonry with very little sort of going on in it, you know, right now. It strikes me that, you know, one of your competitors, Flansburgh, did a really elegant job on the E-wing expansion a couple of years ago, where we had a large expanse, I mean, just for internal planning reasons, for the very reason you don't have more windows in that wall. And they literally sort of pulled the face of the brick out. There was some pattern making, if you will, within the brick that was still very kind of complementary to the overall kind of design theme. And I'm not talking about anything that's zigzag, but I mean, literally like some horizontal lines that sort of comported in some way with other architectural elements and openings. When we have, I see something like this as a design opportunity, which may be seen otherwise as sort of featureless. And I'm also just thinking about the kids as they approach the building. Is that something that you are thinking about or would be willing to think about, where we have those opportunities for sort of a masonry design exercise?
Absolutely. And I mean, we did do that, in fact, on VO.
On the back?
The VO, if you look at the end of the VO.
The end of it, okay.
It has a brick pattern to it like that.
Okay, cool.
Etha, question?
Yeah, I just have a quick question, Jay. I guess the Lynch gym, knowing the lessons we learned from the high school, is there any further coordination with the, perhaps, you know, just asking, last time there was a bleacher question or something, was it resolved, or was the reached out to the director or maybe Coach Fleming or anybody, you know, just asking? That's one question.
So I think, I'm sorry, Frank.
Yeah, question to Frank. Frank,
Well,
wondering whether it was reached out. Okay, you were going to answer that.
Yeah, sure. Well, just so I can answer this part of it. So the direct answer to your question is no. And I think really the indirect answer to your question is, it doesn't seem as though we have a lot of capacity for additional bleachers based on the conversation from last time, but I might have misheard that from Charlie, but it seemed like there weren't a lot of options before we were cutting into the actual floor space.
Right. I think the conversation we had was to keep one fixed row. So it's not a telescoping bleacher. It doesn't move. And it's just along one wall. That was, I think, the decision that we took.
So the conversation with anyone from rec or anyone from youth sports, there really isn't anything to discuss with them, is there, Charlie? I mean, what would other options be?
There really isn't, because you want to maintain enough room on one side that at least some people can sit, and you want to maintain enough room on the other side that the kids can and have a scoring table.
Right, and safety too for
lines. But the other thing we talked about was the fact is that the platform can become a terrific place to watch. So if you can set up 30 folding chairs or 40 folding chairs, that works very well, and they're in an elevated position, and they're a pretty good place to watch something happen. So that's sort of supplemental seating.
Unless you're shooting the game-winning foul shot, right. You know, you're the opposing team and you're on that side of the court. But
Jason Tatum has to do it every night. I don't know why your guys can't.
Pick the money thing.
Right. All I'm saying, Jay, is it would be worthwhile at the very least, maybe as we speak. I think high school is right now playing with the 16th seed anyway. So anyway, it would be nice to reach out to them. I think they bring a lot of revenue running winter sports and whatnot. I don't know. That's how I understood. It's just trying to find out.
Keith, I think we're winning because our kids have played in these, tough gyms. It's give them the grit that they need. So I don't want to make this too luxurious. Lose our winning edge.
Anyway, the other question I had was this nice demonstration of the building we get. Is there any way?
Recording stopped.
Sorry, can I continue to speak? Okay. With the Revit program, is there any way that we can also get
recording in progress?
We can also get the glimpse of the existing site grading and the proposed site grading of this kind of demonstrative view. Just wondering, Charlie, with the Revit capability, could that be sort of something could be demonstrated?
What are you're asking for, an overall site view? Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, something like a glimpse of how you portray the building to us, right? I was just wondering.
So we had done some aerial views of the building on the site. Is that what you mean?
Well, I'm just going underneath the ground. Like, how would it look? How is it looking now, and how would it look in the future? Some kind of how we get the glimpse of the building view. Can we get the glimpse of the site view with the existing grade and a proposed grade? You see what I'm saying? With the Revit, could that be incorporated in? And then,
I don't know that you could. I don't know how you would really. I think it would be. It's such a nominal difference that I don't think it would be a noticeable. I can't quite figure. I don't know how we would do that. I mean, really just.
The site grades are dropping, Charlie, and that's what I was just wondering.
So the grades are dropping, and that's built into this model. I mean, this model has the grade change at the rear.
Right.
Which is here, and it doesn't seem that dramatic because in fact it isn't. That's the only sort of significant topographical feature, other than it does rise to the right, as you you go to the west there, and that's all of course covered with trees, but it does go up quite dramatically on that side, but it's relatively flat. Where we're putting the building is relatively flat. There's a slight drop. The gym goes down 2 feet lower than the classroom, which you can see in this rendering. And then it drops down another, I think 6 feet, something along those lines to the soccer field. And you can see the stairs there. And we're also going to deploy the same walkway that's there now to get down as an accessible route to the fields.
Right. So is there any feature in the program, the Revit model, that we can sort of see it in front of us, like with the grades, like sort of a cross-section view or something, I'm just asking.
Like a site section?
Yes.
I think we could do a site section. I mean, we did those building sections and presented them last time. That could be I think, again, it's going to be not particularly noticeable, but I mean, we could do the section through the building that showed it going to the field, and you'd see that sort of drop off there. And you could do one through the gym and show the hill going up to the right. Those are really the only two major topographical features.
Okay. The portion I'm interested in, especially with the existing fence line and dropping down. So just whether the Revit can incorporate that and just get
yeah, well, it's in there. I mean, we have obviously we have grading plans, and we have that, and grading plans are incorporated into this model. So yeah, you could turn into sections for sure.
Mark, did you have a question also? You all set? Okay. Anything else for Charlie on this?
I have one, Jay.
Okay.
Charlie, can you go back to one of your earlier, it was your first or second perspective that showed the entrance, maybe back one more. Yeah, that's a good one. So or actually, well, I'll ask a question, and it may actually apply to other elements of the building. So the space on the left is kind of like story and a half, right? Cafeteria, and then you've got that assembly space in the middle.
Correct.
You know, what we're not seeing yet are things like, you know, spandrel panels, either out of necessity or from a design perspective, and or frit. Is that something that you might employ in this design? Have you already thought about that? Do you see little use for that on the building, given, you know, the spaces behind, or is that something we might yet see as the design kind of comes together?
It may. I mean, the place we usually end up wanting to deploy that is west-facing fenestration.
Yeah.
So the kind of corner of the cafeteria, we've already had a couple of conversations about what to do there, and we haven't settled yet. But that, to me, is the prime candidate for dealing with the fact that you just get that horizontal sun late in the day and in the winter. So that is a place I think we would have to explore that. It's one of the we do end up using spandrel here, there, and the other place. It's almost inevitable. If we do use spandrel, we're much more likely to try to back it up with insulation and drywall or whatever on the inside, because it doesn't count as an opening if it's insulated. However, it does count as an opening if you don't do that, and you're not getting any benefit from it. You can't see out of it, you can't see into it, you don't get any sun. So if we do it, we're going to be inclined to do it as something that on the inside you wouldn't see it as spandrel, you would simply see it as a wall. But if there's a reason we want to have the expression of a big opening, we may. It may not be worth that, may not be worth the squeeze, you know, it may not be worth the effort. Yeah. But I think that I would say the cafeteria we have to give a hard look at, and probably the library. Mm-hmm. The art room we do already have integrated into the design horizontal sun shading devices, which mm-hmm. as long as they stay, they are another thing that often comes out of a VE exercise, because you can pull them off the building, unfortunately, and they cost a fair amount. But we're hoping we can keep those, and those would probably deal pretty effectively with the southern light there. And we just have to study further what we're getting in terms of some of the sun angles and some of the glare.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I appreciate that. And then I had one other design question, but this is good. This image is a good segue to the question that I have. So in this image, you know, we notice above the cafeteria, the main entrance, and that trespa, that's trespa on the right, where it says Winchester Elementary School. Correct. So we have this kind of gunmetal gray, you know, metal panel sort of coping or trim that's pretty substantial. I mean, that reads as a pretty significant design element that sort of terminates those volumes. If you can go, Charlie, one or two images in, and we look at the right side of the building, it was adjacent to the pre-K entrance. There we go. So here I see some of that on the left, and then what strikes me is on the right, where you have some of those smaller volumes at the main level. Those similarly have that. I think that's sheet metal, right?
This a roof edge.
That in other words, that material, it's a similar design expression, is what I'm saying, for those little pavilions, right? But then when I go up to the top, I don't see that. And so, as you said, you know, there is this idea, right, of future expansion, of course, of the third floor. I'm just curious, is it intentional that those brick elements, you know, are sort of terminated differently, as well as kind of that recessed plane, and maybe that's trespa there as well between those? Is it intentional that those are treated differently?
No, I don't know. I'll have to ask about that one. I think it's true. We'd probably rather be consistent in terms of the roof edges. I mean, one thing to do is make all the other ones a little bit lighter and not quite so heavy. I mean, Agreed. It's true, they're pretty strong right now in terms of how they read.
I agree. That would actually be my preference. I mean, there's something striking about kind of how one reads the masonry on the right against what's in the background, you know, above it. There's a crispness to that that you sort of lose, you know, to the left on other building elements, and that may be a little heavy. I mean, that's a very subjective comment for me to make.
Charlie, on the right there, on that open classroom area, is that actually a parapet wall? Or
yes, yes. Yeah, it's basically up to the windowsill.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the reasons for that is that there are some columns that terminate out at the bays, I believe, and those need some kind of vertical presence to them in order to, in the future, connect to them.
Yep.
And I think we wanted to cover those up.
I'm just saying that could be some of the issue where it's not a real roof going over that wall too.
Well, it isn't. I mean, all that is a
capping.
A cap over the thickness of the wall. It doesn't mean that we couldn't make it bigger.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, the DD submission and the drawing list, Charlie provided that last week. Geether, I sent you a copy of it just so you could see the amount of drawings, but it's really not needed right now, I would say. Anything you want to add to that, Charlie, as far as the DD submission?
No, it'll continue to evolve. Yeah. We'll add sheets, but that was where we were at DD.
Right.
I mean, DD cost estimate, excuse me, just so you can see it was 2 volumes, had, you know, all the disciplines. And I don't have anything particularly to add. It's a typical DD cost estimate set.
No, I agree. So next item was the scope and allowance discussion, question and answers.
You want me to kick this off, Jay?
Sure.
So I was a big advocate for throwing this in here. This is really, it's meant for really every member to react to. As Charlie, I think, said very clearly at the last meeting, you know, they've hit a deadline. They prepared DD drawings, and now they're going through the reconciled estimation process. Still somewhat early in the design phase, right? So there will be some scope that perhaps is not in a drawing, and eventually it will be, but not everything is. And so it's an opportunity for us to either ask questions about or make points about scope that we'd like to see included in the estimate, whether or not it's in the drawings. And you know, we'll obviously get a lot more of this information at the end of March. The point that I wanted to make, that I think I briefly touched on before, but I want to bring it up again, has to do with our ground-mounted solar canopies. So, you know, as we know, we don't, the canopies themselves, the PV panels are not in the project budget. There might be supplemental funding for that, or alternatively might be a power purchase agreement. But we've talked about this idea that certainly you need conduit to get to them. They need to sit on a foundation. Those canopies are not yet designed, and as I think Charlie clearly indicated, you know, we're in the process sort of developing the consumption models for the building. Then that's going to inform what we need by way of roof and ground mounted solar. So it's premature to design the canopies, and because it's premature to design the canopies, it's premature to know what the foundations need to be. But I personally feel like it would be appropriate to carry in our base project not only the conduit, but the foundations for ground-mounted solar, so that that is actually coordinated with the overall site work, number one. Number two, let's say it gets installed via power purchase agreement, and they're not being installed until 6-10 months after the building opens. I would hate to see, you know, new site work get cut up so that we're digging a hole and, you know, putting in foundations, knowing at some point we'll get to a place where we can design them. I think, Charlie, you had indicated at the very least, I think your estimators, there's an allowance for conduit, right?
Yeah, currently there's an estimate, I don't know what it is, but there is, yes, they are going to carry an allowance for conduit within the estimate. I think if we want to carry something for foundations, my recommendation is we put it in as an alternate price. Let's see, and also see where we are relative to costs, because it's you know, it's great to add a lot of scope, but we may be taking the scope back out again pretty quickly here, potentially. We don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly anxious about that aspect of it. But yeah, we will ask them to price out foundations for those canopies.
And I think regardless of how we describe it, whether it's an alternate or not, or even at this stage, if it's literally it's a line and under cost it just says TBD, I'm not sure really what the right answer is. But I mean, there will be some line, right? There will be some element of site solar that will be a part of our project if we go PPA. And an element that won't. Alternatively, if there's a secondary funding source, that Jay, I think, does a good job of speaking to. I mean, if we're in a position to own all of it, that's great. But once again, that would be separate funding source, sort of separate contracts. So I think it would just be helpful that there's some expression of this so we don't sort of forget about it.
Well, I'd like to recommend right now that it's carried as an alternate because that's below the line. It's not in the base number. If it went to the MSBA that way, it wouldn't include these foundations unless you all decide to put it in. But if it wouldn't include, but it would be something you would track over time because there would be this alternate. And in the end, you'd have to decide whether you wanted to put the alternate in the bid documents or not. But it's a pretty typical way of tracking those kind of costs during, kind of this phase and even into the 50% or 60% CD phase. And then ultimately you're going to have to say, yes, we want to put that in as a bid alternate, or no, we're just going to jettison it and pay for it separately or do it some other way. And that'll be a decision you can make, but it's a perfectly good way to track it.
Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, and maybe someone can enlighten me about the amount of scope that's covered by a PPA, assuming we go that direction. But
the PPA person we talked to said they're happy to do all of it.
Yeah.
They'll do the foundations, they'll do the underground conduit, they'll do obviously the canopies. If you wish, they will do, of course, the panels. The issue is, and I think what Chris is worried about is that's all fine and good, but they're digging up your brand new parking lot, and that may be a concern.
Yeah, I'd just be in past experience with engineers, particularly structural engineers, they typically want to design the whole thing from foundation up and are unlikely to want to have someone else's foundation design for a canopy that's yet to be designed. So that would be my concern, is like whether we end up putting the cart before the horse in an effort to save additional work on site as part of this proposed alternate. Like, I just don't see how the design work and the construction work actually mesh particularly well in terms of getting that prepared in advance, unless we have someone on board really, really early before the completion of documents or before the site work component is installed.
So Mark, can I just say, in one respect, we do have someone on board early, and he's with us at the meeting. So we had talked about one notion, because the ground-mounted canopies are just going to be so visible, right? They are conspicuous, that there's an interest perhaps in being sure that they are designed in a way that's sort of very complementary to the overall design and architecture of the Lynch School itself, right? In other words, we want to be sure something doesn't look like it just came from another project, came from another planet. And we have kicked around the idea of whether or not the actual design of those canopies might actually be something TAPE might take on with their structural engineer, just from a design consistency point of view. But I mean, I totally agree with the point you just made. You'd want it to happen in concert, right? Canopy design and foundation. If it is to be, another entity, that could be an issue. If it's the entity we're working with, it might not be. But my recollection is similar to Charlie's. Ken Pruitt set up a meeting with us back in, I think it was August, of a large PPA provider, and so large, in fact, this project is too small for them. And they seem to suggest that, we could find who we wanted to work with, and that those costs would just sort of get rolled into the terms of the PPA over that 20-year period. That's not, just to be clear, it's not part of TAPE's scope right now. It's not in TAPE's scope to design these things.
Pauline and then Geetha.
Yeah, and I'm sure everyone remembers, but for LEED purposes and to be able to hit that additional reimbursement from the MSBA, there is that certain amount of solar that we have to own that we can't roll into the PPA. So that's just in the reminder.
Right. That's the stuff. That's the stuff that's over the outdoor classroom.
Right.
So that's gonna be in the base contract.
Okay.
Etha?
Jay, I was just wondering, the follow-up questions I sent to you, were you able to share with the co-meeting?
I did.
Okay.
I received a response from the team, but I didn't read it myself yet, and I'll send it out tomorrow.
Okay, so we're talking about foundations for canopy, and we're talking about maybe perhaps as an alternate for the foundation for the pedestrian bridge. I was just wondering, for the point Mark pointed out, was the site investigation also done in the past to cover those? My understanding is maybe not. You know, let's say you're designing.
No geotech was done for the pedestrian bridge, so that needs to be added as a additional. We have to do a couple more borings out there, so that's going to come to everybody as another reimbursable request. But I'm waiting to do it until I get a proposal from the surveyor, because we need to get a bunch of trees apparently surveyed at the request of the Conservation Commission. I was waiting until we had that before I did those two together. But that will be another limb. But I think we probably have enough data on the site, the rest of the site for solar. I don't think we need to do anything supplemental on that.
How about the water quality sampling? Charlie, if you're going in the direction of pedestrian bridge, groundwater sampling or water quality sampling, to sample and test it.
Why do we need that for a bridge?
If we're going to work in that area, do you think any kind of dewatering would be involved? And perhaps it would be so that we have a good understanding what is the existing quality of the groundwater, with the potential of there is going to be a groundwater dewatering. Do they typically sample and test it and keep it? What is the existing at the site?
I will ask the geotech engineer, but I don't think they believed there was any reason for that. And I would think that the pedestrian bridge work is, I don't know how you would test the water. I don't know. I'll ask them.
Okay, that was one of my core question comment too. In the site prep where the wells were installed on the upland, not in the downhill side. So if that's the case, pointed out, doesn't it look like a potential that we have to sample and test it and keep it or submit it with the documents, In other words, the groundwater monitoring wells that was installed during the site investigation was upland, not in the area that we might have a over excavation and replacement to prep the site. So if that's the case, doesn't it look obvious to sample and test it?
Okay. Todd, you had a question?
Yeah, I think Mark brought up a really great point about the foundations and the conduit. If not just for the looks of it, how it goes with the rest of the site, but also the functionality. The design should be closely coordinated with the PPA vendor so that, what gets put in is not built incorrectly or not to what we need. I guess that is kind of obvious, but, I think there has to be some sort of close coordination if we're going to use another structural engineer to pre-build these foundations and conduit.
Right. So that was discussed also today. I mean, we're not set on a PPA. We don't know the funding source. We're not agreeing on anything at this point. But Charlie did give us this conversation needs to be had before the middle of the summer, Charlie? So over the next 4 or 5 months, we need to get closer to.
That was my guess. I mean, I felt like by the middle of the summer, we'd have some real certainty around the quantity of panels we needed to reach the goals we've established. And at that juncture, we will kind of know sort of how many foundations we need to have. But I mean, the other thing, there's that. However, if you decided to go the PPA route and have the PPA vendor own the design of the foundations and the canopies. There's another 1.5 years potentially before you're doing final paving and all that. So if you brought them on during the construction period, they could do it as a separate, basically as an owner contract thing.
That would get very messy though, them excavating on a site that another contractor owns the site. They would have to contract with the site contractor, even if it was a PPA. It would have to be a stipulation that they.
Well, you're within your right to have your own other vendors do work. So I guess it would be a coordination thing.
Yeah, I mean, I could see putting the steel on a sonotube afterwards or a pillar, but doing that excavation, that's a lot, trenching for someone else coming on someone else's site.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking about the trenching. I think the trenching's got to be, I think the trenching we would really like to get in the base contract, because I just think it is too much coordination with all the other utilities. The footings are more point locations, right? They are particular places. They're a lot easier to identify. They're a lot easier to isolate. The horizontal running, I think we really probably have to have in our work.
Yeah.
And I just want to remind everybody, it's the EFPBC does not decide the financial format of this. So the conversation really needs to be had with the select board and the school committee about how you want to structure this. And, it's a very long process. So my recommendation is that conversation happens sooner than later, so that there's some consensus on how it's going to be structured, because that goes, ties in directly to the construction.
And I would say I don't disagree with that at all, Meg. It may well be, I really don't want to jinx this. We've had some very favorable results for bidding for Morocco and some other work we're doing around town. It remains to be seen how this will all go with Lynch, but how wonderful would it be if our estimates come in and it looks like we can actually include in the base contract more of this than we maybe think we can right now. And if that's the case, that may be, those ground mounted canopies right there, sort of center stage, on the other side of the playground. We might roll those into the project, and maybe the others kind of to the west, maybe that becomes part of a PPA. I mean, I feel like we just don't know yet. Really what the scope of that would be. And to Charlie's point, we need to make a little more progress, but Meg's absolutely right. I mean, the school committee decides, the school committee has to give approval, for a contract on district property. And then with the select board's approval, the town manager enters into an agreement, but that's for a power purchase agreement. And that's just one way to do it.
Mark?
So I think Meg has a really good point that we need to get this process moved along as expediently as possible. And Colleen had mentioned before, of course, that we need the minimum amount in order to meet our lead goals included in the project. But I don't necessarily see an added benefit to having additional scope of solar added to the base project if the assumption is that we're going to have a PPA. I'd rather have that money available to spend on the project, to be perfectly honest, and it confuses the ownership of different pieces of the solar system if parts of it are PPA and parts of it are owned. And I'd much rather just have it be like, these two little bits are in the project, awesome. Some stuff on the roof is in the project, and then everything else is part of this agreement. And if we felt like that seemed like a reasonable approach, is that something that the school committee could get started on now, plus or minus, of course, knowing that the exact value of total scope might vary somewhat based on energy modeling.
I'm happy, Frank and I would be happy to carry, any message back to the school committee, Mark. As I think the committee is where there is one member of the select board who expressed a strong opinion against PPAs. That was back in September. That's one member. That's not necessarily the board. And there are pros and cons. I think, Jay and others have spoken towards, for the economics, I guess, are better, right? If you can own the whole thing. That's actually really important, because while I think we've been really clear in saying all along that our project budget is not inclusive of all of this, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be an alternative funding source. And I think we've discussed that with Meg before too. I mean, there could be a request of town meeting. There are multiple funding sources. We could still choose to own it all, but just fund it outside of the MSBA. I mean, surely we'd need Vivian's help to sort of communicate all this with the MSBA, but I can't imagine that would be a problem. So I think maybe that's almost the bigger, I wonder what Jay, what you and Meg think about this. To me, that's more the fundamental question is, if the economics favor us with full ownership, then how do we advance that discussion? Because where would that money come from, given all the other needs in town, especially all the capital needs? And for those who haven't been following the capital planning discussion, we just kind of rode the merry-go-round around for the past 4 weeks on a lot of important projects. We thought we were going to get maybe $2 million of free cash to put towards important capital projects, including schoolwork. And the select board ultimately couldn't come to any consensus last week. So it looks like that's not going anywhere. So if there's a wish to fund it, that's great, but there needs to be real commitment and understanding about where the money's coming from. Absent that, then it has to be a PPA just by consequence.
Right. Vivian's explained that they've done the research before, so I think, hopefully she can help in the future. And then the biggest thing is you're going from a discounted rate of electricity to hopefully a zero rate of electricity. So you usually figure that into whatever type of a payment plan you're using.
And Jay, Zapotec actually already did the analysis, at least in a preliminary analysis, and it's right there in the numbers. There's a first cost premium that you have to pay for ownership, and then there's a long-term benefit financially. But from my understanding, that's not this committee's decision to make. But the data are there, and that report should definitely be shared with whoever is the party that is making that decision.
Yeah, and we still don't even know the numbers on the Inflation Reduction Act and what that would only make the numbers better. So
one other observation I would make is many years ago, the school district used to get utility bills for our schools, but we haven't for generations. So those just go to the town now. So that doesn't mean we're unconcerned about energy consumption and utility expense, but the consequence of that is, in fact, has a lot to do with why the Energy Management Committee was even created to begin with. So it seems to me, town hall and the select board is the right place to have a conversation about what the real appetite is for ownership of this, because I think that the school committee is unanimously in support of maximizing the roof and ground-mounted solar. If that support either isn't there for ownership, or it's unclear what the plan would be in terms of a funding source, then I think by midsummer, back to Jay's comment and what Charlie has shared with us, then I think a default is the word I was looking for. I think like a way to have the conversation, I think, Mark, is to sort of set some deadlines and say, okay, if there is an interest in ownership, yes, we have the Zapotec report, but absent a commitment and an identification of funding, which I believe, Meg, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no path to funding this that doesn't go through town meeting in some way, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So town meeting meets twice a year. It's not going to happen this spring because the warrant closes in 4 days. So, maybe this is a fall town meeting thing. And there's a preparation for that. And there's a plan A, and it's town meeting, and it's funding this, and the default. The answer to town meeting is, well, if this article fails, what's the consequence? And the consequence is we do a power purchase agreement. But that means that decision's not being made until, end of October, early November, right, Meg? If we went that path.
Yeah.
So those are, yeah. So those are just some of the I'm trying to put that in context with the overall schedule.
Yeah.
But I didn't intend for this all to be just a discussion about solar. So if there are other items around, allowances and scope that committee members, have questions about or thoughts about, so this is a time to say it. But it may become a little clearer once we get an opportunity to see the drawings at the end of March.
Right. And right now, Charlie, what have you identified as alternates for the project in terms of the pricing?
Nothing.
So the bridge,
Well, I mean,
so the bridge, the canopy at the gym, those are included in the base project, understanding that, you know, there's some risk there.
correct. So if we have a budget of $10 and we come back with an estimate of $15, rest assured, we're pulling a lot of that stuff back out again. We just have to see where we are. But for the purposes of the initial estimate, we did identify alternates at schematic, but there seemed to be a strong interest in the pedestrian bridge, which I think could be a significant cost. And and that roof overhang may be significant in cost. So we may have a hard conversation to have around backing some of it out and putting it below the line and waiting for a better estimate later. But at the moment, it's all in there, everything we could think of, with the exception of the foundations for the solar canopies, which we have not put in. We did put in the trenching.
I want to try to move on because we're losing schedule here. Meg, department head reviews. I think just the meetings.
Yeah, we're gonna schedule a department head review after DDs are complete. So sometime in early April. So okay. We'll get everybody together from all the various town departments.
Okay, thank you. And the site civil, that is scheduled for March 20th. It's already on the schedule for the next
next meeting.
Yeah.
And I want to apologize to Geeta because you had asked the question at the last meeting, Geeta, when was site civil coming? And I couldn't remember what we had said. I thought we had planned it. I thought we'd figured it out, and I couldn't remember. And nobody else said anything either. So I just sat there with my mouth shut. But I think what we decided to do was make that the main event at our evening meeting on the 20th. And I think Charlie had even already coordinated that with his consultants. So that will be the main event for our meeting on the 20th.
I mean, I followed it up with the questions to Jay, and most of it I echoed it there, Chris, and hopefully some of the answers would clear up that meeting. But the only thing I wanted to add, Chris and Charlie, is it would be nice to see the, maybe I misunderstood the line item. It would be nice to see the OPM review in between the designer and us. So that way the designer scope is right there. So then we add in as a committee when we get the drawings. What do you think? Mm-hmm. I know there's a tight deadline with the schedule and whatnot, right? Let's say the designer puts the drawings on the share file or whatever, right? And then my understanding is, okay, the working group is going to grab it and the OPM is going to grab it. So each are going to do the independent review. I was just wondering where.
We as Hill are already doing a review of the submission set that went to the cost estimators. Is that what you're asking, Geeta?
Something for the future, I guess. I was wondering, I guess the last meeting was a heads up given how the design drawings come in and the working groups are supposed to give a review back, right? So I was just adding a thought here. It would be nice, the drawing that comes to the working group, has it already being reviewed by the OPM, then working group is adding in. Otherwise, I don't want to see as a down the road. It's like, okay, it's it's between the OPM review and the designer review. It's already in the designer scope, then the drawings are polished. And then it comes to the working group and we add the value, and then at the same time, whatever that might be. So that's the thinking.
I think we could coordinate that. There will be a time issue as well.
Yeah,
because it's going to take us some time to review the entire set of documents. And our plan is we usually always review the set of documents and create a log that some of the items that we found not as anything other than, hey, let's ask the question, have we thought about it? I didn't notice that we talked about this, but I didn't notice it in the drawings for the coordination efforts. And I'd be in the working group. I think we can coordinate to do that It just might be looking at the time constraint that it'll take to do it as well.
Right, I got it. I was just sort of on the scope issue, and all right, I got it, Vivian. So that, okay. Anyway, thank you.
But we, as your owner's project manager, we are already doing a scope review as well to make sure all of the items and everything that was discussed in these programming meetings are incorporated into the design as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. There are no payments tonight, luckily, so we can get back on schedule here. And the next is the town sustainability policy from Ken. I've sent this out 2 or 3 times for review. This is strictly, there's nothing we're voting on. This is strictly for feedback, and Ken will present it. And then if there's any discussion amongst the members, see what we take from there.
And Ken, I'm assuming you don't need me to pull anything up. You should be able to share screen as a panelist if you want to.
Okay, yeah, great. I'll try to do that once I get, I just want to say a few things sort of up front, and then maybe we'll pull the policy up on the screen so you can see it. But thanks everybody for making the time for this conversation tonight. Really appreciate it. With me, I think in the non-panelist area are the co-authors of the draft sustainable building policy, Jason Roeder and Josh Bears from Climate Action. If I'm not sure if they're able to speak or if you need to elevate them to panelists, but if you wouldn't mind elevating Jason Roeder and Josh Bears, I'd appreciate it. The other primary author, Justin McGee from the Energy Management Committee, couldn't be here tonight. And I think there's other members, just FYI, from Climate Action, including our chair, Rick Eno, and I think Ruth Trimarchi, just in the audience. So I just want to, I want to thank Climate Action, members of the Energy Management Committee, also Colleen and Todd, who serve both on the Energy Management Committee and the EFPBC, and Meg White, who all provided very helpful comments to an earlier draft of this policy. We're here seeking input from the full EFPBC, and again, we really appreciate your time. We want to get this policy right, and that's why we're asking for your input tonight. Just brief overview of where this is coming from. The idea is to ensure that all municipal buildings, not just school buildings, are as environmentally sustainable as possible, consistent with the town's climate and sustainability goals, which include the select board policy from 2019 of committing the town to an 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2050. Another goal is to accomplish a specific measure in our 2020 climate action plan, which explicitly called for the creation of this policy, especially because the last policy was from 2009 and it's really out of date at this point. In drafting this policy, we started with the 2009 policy and then looked at similar sustainable building policies from other communities, mostly in Massachusetts. So a lot of what you are going to see, or hopefully have already seen, because I hope you've had a chance to review the draft that Jay sent around, came from, was boilerplate from other communities that have had policies in place for a while. This policy includes design standards for new construction, large additions, major renovations, and roof replacements, and decreasing specificity and decreasing stringency. And I just want to point out that the policy, calls, of course, for efforts to achieve our net zero energy goals, but it's to the extent feasible or practical. In other words, the policy calls upon the town to do the best it can to ensure buildings are as sustainable as possible. And that means the policy will allow for building projects that meet our budgetary and functional needs, but also our sustainability goals. And just as an example, to the best of my knowledge, the Lynch School will fully meet this policy as currently designed. I'll walk you through a little bit of the policy. We'll take input today. I'll be taking notes. I know Josh and Jason will as well. But if you have other comments that occur to you later, feel free to email me. the next stop, once we've taken input from the EFPBC, would be to go to the school committee and the select board, which are ultimately the two entities that would sign off on and adopt the policy. And with that, let me try to share my screen here. Yep. So you should be able to see the policy on your screen. Again, hopefully everybody's had a chance to go through it. It's 4 pages, which is not that long, but we won't be able to go word for word tonight. I think I'll skip ahead to the key, I think the key points. The purposes are along the lines of what I just said. I mentioned the responsibility. It's the school committee and select board ultimately adopting this with, town manager, superintendent of schools, the sustainability director, school principals, DPW director, EFPBC for responsible for adherence to the policy. This section under the policy just points out that this isn't, of course, the only policy that it'll apply to town buildings. The OPR that's under development, basis of design, and the CDs will, of course, direct more specifically the building of projects. This policy is at a more general level, and there's a set of statements here at the beginning that'll apply to the policy as a whole. And it's, pretty straightforward. We think, that this policy should be considered and provided to all relevant parties, upfront before we're, well into design. It's talking about the fact that our design professionals involved should have some experience in sustainable building construction, LEED accredited and/or experience in designing buildings that comply with with similar policies. It does include a provision that the sustainability director, who is of course me at this point, will be involved in design discussions. Obviously, I have no power over ultimate designs, but just to be able to make suggestions, to ask questions, to point out where we might be either in compliance or not compliance with the policy, looking for opportunities to apply for grants and utility incentives along the way. And then this policy goes into design for specific scenarios, including new construction. I actually can't see any of the video for anyone else. I can just see the screen. So as we go through this, if someone has a question, I'm not sure how I'll know unless you just sort of butt in.
I'll watch for the questions, Ken. I'll watch for the hands.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate that.
Yep.
So just before settling on this one section, I just want to point out there's a number of items that are similar to multiple sections. So we have new construction. It's got several sections, several points. Additions, which have many of the similar points. Major renovations that have fewer of those points. And then for roof replacements, of course, there's just these 3 points. So as we talk about some of these measures, we'll only really need to talk about them once because they'll repeat verbatim in the different sections. We just ultimately found that it was going to be the simplest way to structure the document to do it that way. So again, this policy has a lot of shoulds in it, not a lot of shalls. This is essentially, again, that we're looking for the town to do the best it can on school buildings and non-school buildings. So LEED Gold or better, ideally, all electric, except for standby generators, highly energy efficient, that we engage with the utilities as early as possible to take advantage of their design guidelines, their design support, as well as maximize utility incentives as we're doing with Lynch. Fully commissioned.
I think there's already a question. Mark has his hand up. Just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, I was waiting for Ken to finish, but
yeah, what rather than just me rambling on and then at the end, why don't I just stop there and we can address them again? I can't see your face, but I'll.
All right, Mark was first up.
Sure, Ken. Just a quick question. I think, first of all, thanks to you and everyone else who worked on this. It's a great effort and definitely something that I love to see, especially as we look towards new building projects in the town of Winchester. One quick note about EUI. A nitpicky thing is on the major renovations, you didn't include the qualifier or as close to those standards as practicable. But also it's set for EUI of 25 or lower, which is great. Did you look at any guideline documents that might adjust that target value based on the program use type of a particular building, or did you just set on 25 because that's a kind of lower practicable limit for pretty much anything?
Yeah, it's more the latter. We struggled a little bit with trying to think through and include every possible sort of caveat and use cases, without ending up with a document that's, 5 times as long. I think that's why, the original document had a lot of shalls in it. And essentially we shifted them all to shoulds, in part for reasons just like the one you're raising. There will be cases that where we need to have more flexibility. And there'll be a good case to be made why, for example, it's really hard for laboratories and hospitals to achieve low EUI scores. Not that we're designing hospitals and laboratories on behalf of the town here, but it's an example where it's hard to achieve those low EUIs. So, the intent is to get enough specificity to provide guidance without without having so much detail to cover every possible case that it just gets sort of unwieldy. But it is a very good question.
Any other questions?
So Ken, you still had some presentation to go, right?
Yep, thank you. So just this is just a section on new construction. And again, much of this appears in the next 2 sections, so we'll be able to go through faster. Full commissioning during and after construction to ensure the buildings are operating as we design them. Maximize on-site solar generation with a goal of net zero, again, as we have for the Lynch School. Low flow water fixtures, low emitting materials that meet the California Department of Public Health standard method. MERV 13 filtration as a minimum. On-site EV electric vehicle charging. I think actually under the now in place new stretch code that applies to the town, I think that these numbers are either exactly the same as that or might be 5% higher. So it's pretty much required in the code now anyway. Stormwater managed on site. And then if there's food service, that reusable be used. And if not, then at least compostable. So that's the new construction section. Again, I can't see if any hands are raised, Jay, but any.
Just Chris, are you waiting, Chris? Or you want to?
I was just waiting until Ken was done. And Ken, you could always bring it up at any time, but if you stop share screen, then you can sort of see everybody too. Yep. So you can control that.
You get Chris and then Colleen right after you. So there's 2 to go.
I didn't want to interrupt your flow, Ken. Are you done or did you have more you wanted to cover?
I could just keep going through if there are questions specific to.
Oh no, forget it. I'll wait till you're done.
Oh, okay. Colleen, do you want to jump in now or do you want to wait till I get through the others?
No, absolutely at the end.
Oh, okay. All right. So then next up would be additions, but only 10,000 square feet or larger. And really many of the same requirements for brand new construction apply in this draft there, but they only apply to the addition itself. not to the rest of the building. And as you can see here, it only applies where you can have a clear boundary between the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems and scope of the addition and the rest of the building. Much of this is really the same as above. I'm just skimming through. I think it literally might be exactly the same. Doesn't call for the building to be net zero because, again, we're only adding an addition. And then it references EV charging stations, but at a much lower level of stringency than where you have control over the whole site. Then we have major renovations, which, based on some of the other examples we saw, we defined as impacting more than 50% of the existing square footage of the building, or 15,000 square feet, whichever is lower. In other words, not a small renovation, but a pretty substantial one where you can impact the building envelope and the HVAC system. And so this calls for those substantially renovated buildings to be all electric. A low EUI, but not as low as for new construction. And engaging with the utilities for design assistance and incentives is the same, commissioning the same, solar the same, plumbing fixtures the same. The rest of this is the same. And then for alterations to parking areas, just exploring the potential for EV charging stations. And finally, for roof replacements, before simply replacing the roof, take a look at insulation, take a look at the possibility for solar PV and for additional insulation. So maybe I'll stop sharing so I can see you, but I can reshare at any time and go back to that. There you are.
Right. So Chris was first and then Colleen.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you, Ken. I saw Josh was there a minute ago. There he is. And he moved on my screen. Yep. And Jason and others who put a lot of time into this. And I want to recognize Ken's been very patient. I think the draft that Jay shared, came about actually in December. And we were obviously focused on the debt exclusion override and trying to get some things off our plate. Yep. And I think Jay has shared this with the committee at least 3, maybe 4 times. So I hope everybody's had a chance to read it. So I want to take, I'll preface this by saying, Ken, you may not be happy with some of my comments, but I'm gonna try to be balanced, and I want to end on a sort of a positive note. So first of all, from a process point of view, so it hasn't been really clear to me who the proponent is. Ken, is this something you're doing as sustainability director? Is this something, for instance, energy management is doing as a committee and the climate action committee? It may not matter too much. It matters to me a little bit, but what I want people to understand is that we have some public bodies in Winchester who are sort of by statute policymakers, and that includes the school committee. I think folks will be, and so typically it's our public bodies who are policymakers that develop policy, and then we then expect management and staff to follow the policy. It's a little different for staff to be coming forward to policy makers and say, here's a policy. There are probably some examples of that, and there's a lot of stuff here that I think is helpful for, the school committee and select board to react to. What I hope Ken will be pleased to hear, and other committee members. So the school committee has strategic visioning meetings throughout the year. In our meetings this year, we identified early on, and this goes back to, I think, the summer, sustainability was one of, I think, 5 or 6 particular areas of interest for the school committee. And at our last meeting, which we held at the high school public meeting, we actually, through unanimous consent, agreed that sustainability is something we want to tackle through actually a policy initiative as early as this summer. And that's sustainability in a broad sense. I mean, we talk a lot about sustainability in terms of buildings, and we meaning the school committee, but we recognize there are other elements to that just affect sort of general district operations. So the school committee already has intention to develop a sustainable building policy. And I think we will develop a great one. I think it will be considerably shorter than this. I think we can do a lot of good work in maybe one page. I'm hopeful that we can find a way to reference or incorporate the OPR, which we're not talking about tonight, but there's been a lot of work done there as well, inclusive of the work that Todd has done around HVAC set points and thermal comfort guidelines. And I don't know if you were watching at the last meeting, Ken, but Todd was agreeable for us sharing that with Charlie. So that's actually gotten back to TAP-A and the engineers, and they were actually very pleased to see that it sort of falls in line with the overall basis of design. Generally speaking, I'm gonna put my school committee hat on for a minute. Our policies, we like them to be relatively short. So obviously they're somewhat aspirational, but they tend to leave operational decisions to management, and they tend not to be too granular. So for instance, we tend not to cite statute because statutes can change, right? We can develop a policy and there's a statute that 2 years from now, the statute changes. So now we got to go back and change the policy. So I'm mindful of that when I see a draft document like this, for instance, that references, ASHRAE standards. I mean, those may change. You mentioned a moment ago, Ken, the code has changed as well. So my general disposition is towards something that is much shorter, that is much more sort of aspirational, that at the same time gives the kind of flexibility needed not only for any particular project, but also for the process. So then I would just take a step back and ask us all to reflect on how this project is going right now. I've never been more excited about a school building project than this one. There's so many things that we're going to accomplish on this project. A lot of that started even when we drafted the RFP. So we drafted an RFP with the input of school committee, the administration, town management, select board leadership. I am proud to say, and I know Ken's heard me say this, I don't know if Jason or Josh are aware, this was the first RFP for a school project that we deliberately described the climate action plan. And we actually provided live links to the climate action plan. And yours truly was at the walkthrough with the architects and the OPM, and Vivian may remember this. We specifically told our consultants how important the climate action plan was. This RFP for this project speaks to the Massachusetts decarbonization plan. It's 2030, 2035, I forget, and how important that is. I mean, we recognize, institutional buildings contribute, was it 40% towards climate change. So I feel like we've done a lot of really good work because it's sort of the right thing to do. And I think it does represent a culture shift that we've had in Winchester. And I know, Ken, part of your charge when town meeting created your position was to help us make some culture shifts, and that is important. But I think a lot of this big stuff, we're sort of there. And I feel like this process and this project are sort of emblematic of that. And I'd like to think that we can come up with a policy that not only sort of affirms that, but recognizes that the people we have today, that us here on this call and others, we get it. And we're making some of these decisions because they are now the right thing to do. I could go through the draft. There are many suggestions in the draft that, I might say I have a problem with, or I think are too sort of granular or maybe not realistic, but there's a lot in here that I do think is good. And I think our school committee chair was with us at least earlier. Maybe she's watching tonight. I hope Michelle is. And, this is the kind of stuff that I think is helpful for us once we dig into the very real work of developing a policy. And I think that when we're there and we come up with a draft, I would certainly advocate for, including you in that process. But this is not, as it sits tonight, this is not something I'm really comfortable with. But you raise a lot of good points that are important for us to aspire to. It just feels more like, a project checklist than a policy. I'm going to shut up in a moment. Here was one example I was thinking of as I was reading this. I was thinking, how would a policy like this affect, for instance, the elevator project at Parkhurst? Because there will be those projects, right? So does it add time, expense? Does it inhibit us in some way from getting somebody on board? I will probably always have those questions. That RFP was very different, for instance, than the RFP for this project. But with respect to the language that says projects should strive to maximize on-site solar generation, I might push back, Ken, and say, what if the new Morocco, and we don't know yet what that is, it might be a rebuild of what we have today, it might be a new building on Leonard Field. What if we wanted to have a green roof at Morocco? And what if, by some wonderful stroke, we felt we could actually meet the energy consumption needs with geothermal? To me, that would be exciting, because as you've heard us say before, putting solar on a roof, is great for a period of time, right? But roofs fail and you've got maintenance issues. And DPW has talked about that ad nauseum. So to me, solar is one of a number of renewables, right, that we should consider. But again, every project's different. So if there's an opportunity to incorporate geothermal, which I know you're a big fan of, as am I, that's something that I might suggest on a different project. Maybe that should be the priority. So I guess I would just close in saying, I think whatever policy we ultimately come up with needs to be aspirational, needs to be really clear about what the goals are, and yet still be flexible enough that we meaning school committee, administration, EFPBC, all of us, can still sort of be unencumbered, right, in making those decisions that sort of best suit the needs of the project, while still, in every respect, meeting the aspiration of the climate action plan. And I'll shut up.
Colleen?
And did you want to respond to that before I have comments?
Just very briefly, thank you, Chris, for your comments and for your long and hard work on the school committee, on this committee, and in town, which I very much appreciate, not just as the sustainability director, but as a 12-year resident and as someone who has sent 2 children through the school system. So I would just say, to your first question, which I absolutely agree with, in terms of where policy comes from, and then who implements it. The creation of this sustainable building policy was one of the specific items in the climate action plan. So this is really coming from the Climate Action Advisory Committee. I played a significant role helping to manage the project. But in part because I'm the paid staff, I have the time. But it's really trying to move the thing forward. I also have more sort of, in some cases, a little bit more of the technical knowledge than some of the other authors and editors of the document. But I totally agree. This policy is to be adopted by town meeting, by the select board, by the school committee, et cetera. And that's really the intent here. And we want to get this right. A lot of people worked pretty hard on this. I think your comments are definitely understandable and well taken. Why don't I just stop there and let Colleen go?
Sure. So I think it's also because I worked on it and I've read it over a handful of times. I work on about 40 projects a year in lots of different municipalities across the state. And I think that this is one of the most succinct and sort of easy to understand policies as it relates to green building and LEED, renovations, additions, all of it. So a long time ago, when I worked on the MSBA design standards, we had a very similar sort of hierarchy in terms of what the triggers would be of looking at and requiring different green building standards for renovations and additions. And I think it's succinct, and I think that the OPR and the ways that we wanted to add information to it is much more project specific. And I love the way that this, is digestible by folks. The other thing I want to say is that, having been on a handful of teams and getting feedback from the Lynch process, the sustainability piece of it for folks that weren't selected as the designers, they did not feel like that was first and foremost really important. And maybe it was their interpretation, maybe it was, whatever it may be. I think having this policy in writing, I love that we put information in the RFP. I think that's great. if I were an architect on, or, you know, design professional in those teams, I would be looking to their local green building policy as a sort of affirmation of that, or to have more detail. So the fact that we don't have a policy that's been updated since 2009 seems, you know, it seems like good timing to do that, even if this also gets supported, or maybe there's a different policy potentially for school, from the school committee, or whatever it may be. I don't understand, you know, the sequence of how all this happens, I think is up to the folks that live in this world. But I would hate for things to not move forward because other folks are working on it. I think policy can also build on each other. So I think at this point, it would be something that I would support. And I think that what this policy does, which is also different than the OPR, is that it gives a pathway for folks to be able to get to LEED Gold and to hit the EUI goals, right? So you're not saying, well, we have preferred recommendations on water reduction and things like that that are just good practice and good policy, especially from an ROI. I think that, you know, the EUI targets allow us to think about different types of systems, whether it be, you know, air source heat pumps or geothermal or whatever it may be, but there's a performance target that we can all agree on and meet. And so whatever pathways or whatever sort of nuance to each of the projects, there's still a pretty clear articulated goal. And I think that, you know, we learned that on the Lynch School, that the goal from the select board was net zero, probably after schematic design. So that wasn't something that was totally communicated. So if those are, you know, those are the types of goals that we have as a community, I think having that very clear as a town policy would be really important. I think it also helps to shape the folks and the consultants that, you know, someone like Charlie would bring in for that type of project. And so, I mean, it's kind of, my thoughts are a little bit all over the place, but I think it's a great policy. I think we'd be well served by it. And I think relative to all of the other policies that I see across the state, I think it gives us a lot of flexibility internally as a town to be able to carve out pathways that meet the project needs. So thanks, Ken and team, for leading this effort.
Thank you, Colleen. Todd, question? Comment?
So I have a question. So Chris, are you suggesting that we scrap this and start over, or do you have a path going forward on how to proceed with this?
So I'm saying the school committee has been talking about sustainability as a policy initiative for some time, and committed at our last strategic visioning session to tackle this as a policy measure sometime this summer. That's the job of the school committee. So we have that legal authority to do it, and we want to do it. And so we will. And I think the work that's been done, there's some in here that's helpful. I think conversations about whether, you know, MERV ratings ought to be a part of a policy or some other document are conversations we should have. I think the OPR is such a strong document. I'd love to find a way, you know, there may be some elements of this. Colleen just mentioned one, although it just escaped me. I think there are some elements of this document. Actually, I wrote it down. Colleen, you called it, design standards. That was the expression Colleen used. There may be some language around design standards that may be better suited in the OPR. And I got to say, I look at the OPR a little bit differently, I guess, than Colleen does, because I feel like we've actually worked hard to make that a little more of a generic document, not to water it down, but to make it actually more applicable to a variety of projects purposefully, because I think the intention was the OPR could be used as a tool for all of our school building projects and, you know, in our town building projects as well. So I think a lot of what I see in here kind of belongs in more of like a design standards document, or which could be an OPR. I think a lot of the OPR kind of is design standards. So to answer your question directly, Todd, about whether it should be scrapped, I honestly had no idea this was even happening until Ken sent it in December. So I was scratching my head a little bit when I saw it, because the policy maker for school buildings is really the school committee. But it's great that we have the people in town that are thinking about this. Well, number one, that have the expertise, and a lot of us are here on this committee for those very reasons. And, you know, we have some some similar but different expertise on things like climate action and the Energy Management Committee. So when we have those meetings as a school committee, those are public meetings. And as I said to Ken a moment ago, I think as maybe we can begin to draft something, we're in a position to share something. I expect that we would, because we should.
Okay, we have Frank, Mark, and then Josh. So Frank, you want to take it?
Actually, Jay, why don't you let other people go first? I'll go last.
Okay, Mark.
Sure. It was interesting to hear that comment, Chris, because I guess that left me a little confused, because I thought the proposal that Ken has is actually for the town entirely, so that there is a town policy for the approach to buildings and their sustainable goals. And I think that's awesome. I think that's a fabulous idea. And it seems weird to me that each subgroup of different building types would establish their own separate sustainability goals, which could lead to kind of muddle and confusion, particularly if we have support at the select board level and we have a position like Ken's in the town, which is kind of unified around establishing a townwide policy. So not that it's my charge to dictate who says what, but it feels to me like a townwide document is vastly preferable to each individual subgroup within the town developing their own set of standards.
So I will, this may be something Frank is better poised to respond to. What I would offer you is, we have a unique clientele. They're children. Some of them are 4 years old. The last time there was this idea of a joint policy, and to be really clear, it's not clear to me that the 2009 policy was actually voted by the school committee. I don't know that I could ever find that, but clearly the intention was it was going to apply to all town buildings. That was clear. That included things like set points in the cooling season for, I think it was 66 degrees, which today, I mean, that policy is actually illegal. The Attorney General of Massachusetts issued a regulation because that's too cold for kids. And so it can't be colder than 68. I remember when we got into the planning process on VO, Mark, there were folks who came to the school committee table and waved a document and said, this is the town policy, you must do this. And that included tremendous pressure against air conditioning VO. And I think you hear unanimously from the school committee today, that was a big mistake. There was a lot of pressure put on the school committee to say, this is the town policy. But the good news is, I mean, because frankly, it's so expensive, we'd go bankrupt. We don't build school buildings every year. So that is actually a good thing. And it's a big deal when we do them. And we want them to last generations. And we want them to be inspiring spaces. And we want them to last. And we want them to be efficient. And we want them to be easily maintained. And so we, I think, take on this charge each time with new information and new thinking and new perspective. And we want each project to be better than the last. But all I can tell you from my point of view as a school committee member, the law grants authority to the school committee in this regard, and it is a responsibility of the school committee to set policy. We, in fact, we were having these meetings before I even knew that this thing existed. So there's no subterfuge here of, you know, Ken and Josh and Jason. I literally wasn't even aware that this was going on. I mean, we started this conversation last summer. So because frankly, there are members of the school committee that I mean, we all sort of feel the same way, some particularly passionately. So as I said, I think that work will certainly by summer, it should be well underway, and maybe even later this spring. If it means though, Mark, that there is, you know, a policy that pertains to school projects and a policy that pertains to town projects, if that's the consequence, I guess so be it. Because at the end of the day, if we're sending out an RFP for a school project, we've got a policy that we can attach.
Well, I'd recommend you look at, I mean, my understanding is that Ken presented this to this committee and is presenting it to many others so that he can get feedback from multiple constituencies and we can get one unified policy for the town. And if the school committee wants to have their own separate sub policy, I guess that's okay. It sure seems like a lot of duplication of effort to me, but that's That's just my opinion.
Josh, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I think one point I was just going to respond to, Chris, you brought up specifically how the policy would apply to the Parkhurst elevator project, I think. Is that the one you brought up?
Yeah, I just threw that out as an example.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the qualification of each section, I don't think that qualifies probably under any of the sections unless it is more than 50% of the existing building or 15,000 square feet. So I'm not sure that it would have anything to say about something as small or as focused as that type of project.
Well, again, I look at the front end of the policy and it says architects and or building professionals should be LEED accredited, and that the sustainability director will be included in all design discussions. I mean, that's at the front end. That's before we even get into the distinction between additions and new construction. By the way, LEED is becoming so common today, not just among architects and engineers. So I don't think that that's a big hurdle. I threw that out as an example. I mean, that's one end of the spectrum. Then you've got other things that are much more in the middle, like the our recent 3-story addition to the back of McCall. You're probably familiar with. The E-wing was built in 2009, and then we did an addition to that. And I remember vividly some meetings that the EFPBC table. Todd, took one of our mechanical engineers to task on some things, and I respected Todd for doing that. But there was a lot of learning from that as well. I think the intention was try to make that addition happen while sort of using the existing building systems that we had. I've not gone back and looked at the square footage, but it would be interesting to know how this might affect, that project.
Right. Yeah. And I think if you look at the first line actually of what you're reading, it says the following provisions should apply during all project phases. So anything that's in here only applies to the 3 categories that we're talking about: new construction, additions that are 10,000 square feet or larger, or renovations that impact 50% or 15,000 square feet. So it wouldn't arbitrarily apply to a random small project like adding an elevator in Parkhurst, for example. But yeah, I think, to the point that Mark made, I think we're very much of the interest of let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to, tell the school committee to do things that you think are wrong. And so to the extent that we can incorporate your feedback into this draft, I think that's our goal.
Okay. Colleen, did you still have a question? Okay, then we have Todd and then Frank. Todd?
Yeah, so if this policy is going to be rewritten by school committee or revised, I really think that Ken ought to be part of that effort. That's my comment.
And that comment is such a perfect springboard to what I want to say. So one of the things I love about Winchester is the amount of volunteer community involvement and the level of expertise that you all bring to the table around so many different topics. One of the things that's challenging as an administrator in this community at times is that same thing. And I've been wondering, and it feels to me a little bit like this is somewhat of a semantics conversation, because if you really want the school committee to have a conversation around a policy that includes technical guidelines for construction, then we'll be meeting every day for the next 6 months to get there. I mean, that is not within their purview. It should never be within their purview. And honestly, for some members, it's not even within their interests. So I'm not going to speak for the committee. I'm not going to speak for Chris, but as the superintendent, sorry, myself for a second, I can just tell you that is really not how we think about policy in the school department. Most of our policies are, unless the statute tells us we have to have a policy around something like bullying plan, for example, the policies the school committee passes are generally much broader, with the understanding that administrators and leadership are going to implement the policy, because you don't want to be in a situation where, for example, you have a very specific consequence for behavioral infraction that may not even make sense in a particular situation an administrator is dealing with. So as a policy, the school committee, in my opinion, would not be appropriate for them to adopt this level of detail as a policy. And so as we think about this moving to the school committee level, I think I would probably end up just stabbing my leg with a pen if I had to sit through meetings where this is trying to be explained, because no, you don't want the school committee feedback. And I love every one of my school committee members, but you don't want their feedback. You just don't, because there's going to be so many questions around this, and questions are going to take a long time to answer if the expectation is that you want them to pass this policy as written. It's not within their purview. It's not within their level of expertise. And it's why I and others are hired, including and Ken on the town side. I mean, as a set of aspirational goals, which is a point that Chris made, it makes a lot of sense to me that we should be working in concert as a town and as a school department on the same level of goals. But even this committee, I believe, has more purview about how sustainability is carried out in a new school construction than the school committee is. I mean, the school committee really doesn't do the day-to-day like you do in an oversight of a building project, and it's set up intentionally that way by the MSBA. So this isn't a vote against or a comment against or for a policy. It's just, frankly, this is too much. It is way too much for a school committee to try to get into and adopt and codify in policy. It just does not make sense operationally. We don't treat any other thing that way unless it's mandated by law. So I'm saying this out loud. Ken and I have not had a chance to really catch up with Ken. There've been a few other things going on, I'm sure, for both of us. But I would just say to you as a committee tonight that it would be very difficult for me to feel good about bringing this forward to the school committee as a full-blown policy. I like the idea of a one-pager policy of a goals and aspirations, and I think the school committee would be relying on the experts that are within the community, both within the school department, and in this particular topic, there's not a lot of them, and also on the town side, as well as other appointed and appointed boards such as EFPBC. So that's my 2 cents on the.
Thank you.
Can I just add quickly, Jay? I agree, and forgive me, it was Jason or Josh. One of you said you referenced that 2009 policy and the need to replace that, and I totally agree with you. So, my preference would simply be to let the school committee continue to act on its strategic initiatives. Let us deal with the policy initiative around sustainability, which might be actually significant to you, Ken, and others, because there may be policies that are. There will be one explicitly about buildings, but there may be some other policy initiatives you may be just as interested in. I mean, I've seen a couple of emails from Fritzy with questions about, the kitchen. So for instance, that's an operational issue that might be addressed somehow. And there are many others that I probably can't even think of. I feel like we'd be better suited if the school committee can just sort of get through this process, do its work, and then see what we have. And then maybe that's something that EMC and climate action can sort of react to and decide, do we feel that conversation needs to go further somehow, whether it's a policy document or it's like, as Colleen said, design guidelines or what have you. But I'm confident that we will get there.
Right, Geetha?
I just want to add, Jay, just in my point of view, I see as if it's a policy, in my view, just a general statement is perhaps on a high level, sort of identifying the codes 1, 2, and 3, and and 5, 6, and 7 for design guidelines, and follow this and give the freedom to the specific design to take it from there. For example, if I may speak for MSBA, yes, the high level requirements, if it's given at the RFP stage, whether the town wants to follow the green building, the path, or maybe want the net zero. So those kind of high level requirements, that's the one I see as a policy to exist. And maybe if I pinpoint to one, if I say, maybe for Morocco, if I ask 100% stormwater management at the site, maybe it is impossible knowing that it's a shallow groundwater. So for that reason, I guess I wanted to say if it's a policy, it has to be just on a high level, identifying the current codes or the best management guidelines and sit there and then let the design team or the architect take it from there, or the volunteer group of EFPBC. That's how I see it.
Okay. Colleen?
So just from a next step standpoint, understanding that the school committee might be looking at, or is currently developing their policy around schools and sustainability. There's still other town buildings that would benefit from having clear goals and vision around sustainability. So are we a committee that could vote to have the select board look at it? I mean, I know when Todd and I developed the OPR, we, had a recommendation from the energy committee that they supported the energy goals in their purview. And I just wonder if there's support that we can give as a committee for those that feel like they support it townwide, and that, obviously everyone does better when we have more ideas and thoughts in. So after Chris and the school committee, develop their specific goals, there could be some tiering of different building types or something like that. So I don't know what happens from here, because I feel like this is in the same boat as the OPR, which is, what is it?
Yeah,
it's a resource, but what do we do?
I don't think so. I think it's a reference for us, and it's not something we can vote on as a committee. I just don't think we have the authority to vote on
that's my question. Yeah,
but the feedback, it's welcome, and we're glad Ken came to us with it. And I think the feedback is good and the conversation. I can't see a way that we can vote on it. Brian, you had a question, then Mark?
Just the quick point that I really think the goal here is really admirable, and having policy statement that sets the vision of what we're trying to do is very admirable. It is the level of specificity in the recommendations. I just worry about the unintended consequences of having that much specificity. It is also very useful to have those specific sort of design standards to point to think about in various contexts, but there's always so many trade-offs, and I just think this is too specific for the sort of policy document we need here. But I think the effort and the goal is admirable, and we're headed in the right direction with the process, but I think it needs to be somehow dialed back.
So can I just jump in and say
sure,
a couple things that, so the Climate Action Advisory Committee let me just start with the Climate Action Advisory Committee, which is charged with implementing the climate action plan, tasked me as well as a couple of other members of Climate Action and a member from Energy Management or volunteered to revise the older policy so that we have guidelines. When we're looking at the design of new buildings, we have a basis for what we're going to aim for at a broad level. In addition to that, it's been made clear to me, I'm technically within the town manager's office. It's been made clear to me that it's an expectation that I have, that I work to ensure all town buildings are as sustainable as possible, certainly in compliance with the select board's goal for 80% greenhouse gas reduction and the climate action plan. As I said earlier in response to one of Chris's comments, I don't make policy. I'm on the execution end of it as a staff employee. I don't really feel like I understand where I would go from here based on this conversation. If we have a policy sort of voted on by climate action we hope the town will do these things, I can then take that and sort of convey it in whatever venues I can, but that's kind of seems like fairly weak tea. It doesn't give me a lot of direction on what I can point to. It doesn't, it doesn't get me at the table early in the design process, other than if I'm sort of invited. that just makes it strikes me as that making it difficult for me to do the job that I was hired to do. So, you know, I don't know who the correct bodies are to work on the language. I stand ready to work with any town committee, or in fact, members of committees, to work on this draft, remove specificity, add specificity. But at the end of the day, you know, I have to be able to point to something as giving me authority to push in the directions that I'm going to push in, even though I don't have authority over anyone. The only power I have is soft power and the ability to apply for grants and to provide technical assistance. But you know, that's why that's why we're here today. It's for input. This is not a fully baked policy that we're trying to you know, ram down anyone's throat. The whole purpose of being here is to get input and come up with a policy that works. So I guess I would just say it would be you know, unfortunate if we close out the meeting without any sort of further guidance about next steps for policy formulation and ultimately who's going to be voting upon this to become a town policy.
Maybe Frank can wrap it up, because my sense is, Ken and others, that the message is the school committee has already taken this on, that the school committee will act on developing a policy that will be much as Frank described, a shorter document, more higher level, not as granular. It doesn't exist yet, but we've talked about this going back to last summer. So that's what will happen. There's nothing to show you yet because it hasn't happened yet, but we actually made some progress. There was unanimous consent at our last strategic meeting at the high school around taking this on as a policy initiative. And I am committed that once we get to that place and that process, and we'll let you know about it.
Frank, do you want to comment on that? No. Josh, your hand's still up. Do you have another question?
No, I think sorry. I just left it up. I left it up from last time. No further.
Okay. Frank, you want to go?
Sorry, I did not unmute. I would just go back to what Ken said earlier. I think it kind of at the beginning of this is that, you know, everyone shares, I think, a lot of the goals that are included in many parts of this policy. The technical expertise and how we get there, I think, does depend on the particular project at the particular time. And to me, this is much more about a set of guidelines that everyone should be clear about, that they exist, that they're out there, that this is what the town of Winchester, including the school department, aspires to or expects our hired staff to do or to work toward, our voluntary committees like this one to have in front of them when we're doing these kinds of projects. But I just don't think I think policy to me is a bit of a misnomer in terms of the amount of detail that's in this. It just makes me super uncomfortable that, because what happens if a school committee adopts this or the select board adopts this and something in it is not met? And how much more of a bureaucracy do we throw into a process of building a school or doing any kind of renovation or construction project within the town, where we have to run back to an elected board, you know, who only meets maybe once a week or twice a month to try to get some kind of an exception to the rule that's built into a policy that's been adopted. I think the intent is the same. I just don't think that we want to be, I don't want to be in a situation, and I don't think the school committee should be in a situation where they've adopted something that is so technical that it would require the kind of oversight that just is not doable.
One thing that I just wanted to respond to that, Frank, is that the intent of the policy is it's guidelines, and it's not enforceable like a zoning law. Like, this is not a bylaw of the town. This is a policy to follow. And as it states at the beginning, to the extent that's feasible economically and for the project. So these are aspirational goals. They're more like a North Star for projects that if it's shared with the people at the early stages, the idea is to point you in the right direction. It's not to handcuff you to them because ultimately the school committee and the select board have the authority to vote on funding a project or not. They could decide, yeah, we understand it doesn't meet all of the policy specifics, but we're okay with that.
And I'm just suggesting, respectfully, we should not put our elected boards in the position of having that authority. That, I mean, the project gets funded. There's a whole lot of people that work a lot hard, like this particular group that has the technical expertise to move forward around a set of guidelines that are clear to everybody. I just don't think that the litmus test for a select board or for a school committee around supporting a project or not supporting a project is this kind of document. I think that they hire people for a reason. They have these committees for a reason. And I think they should depend and rely on the technical expertise of the groups that are working on these projects. That's all.
Mark, you had a question still? I want to try to wrap it.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone like Colleen, who has more direct experience with this for a long period of time, could probably speak more eloquently on it. But one of the reasons that systems like LEAD have been widely adopted and are highly effective despite all their flaws is because they establish some real, actual, measurable goals against which your project tries to meet a set of goals. They don't have to meet them all, but they can meet some of them, and they try to meet a package of them. A set of vague aspirational goals that have no technical requirements are effectively meaningless because they don't do anything to drive projects forward or to drive projects to be better. And I appreciate all the work Ken and other experts have done in establishing what they feel like are some really key kind of technical drivers for projects that are fairly general, but that establish real goals for projects to meet and that are attainable by all types of projects in the town of Winchester. And they've opened it up.
Member of the school committee has some understanding of what LEAD is and where it comes from. On the other hand, they probably don't know what ASHRAE 123XYZ is, and they probably don't know what the acronym ASHRAE even stands for. I think I do, but it takes me a minute to spell it out in my head. You know, although we tend to go for LEAD projects, for instance, with the MSBA, we have the opportunity to do mass chips, as I think you know. We have historically preferred to go LEAD, but that's always an option. So there's a perfect example where maybe for like a replacement Morocco, we might want to go mass chips and not LEAD, but we have a policy that says LEAD. It might be that the policy actually speaks to both and literally says it should be one or the other. That to me seems like a reasonable compromise for the very reason you just said, because it spells out a pathway, right, with a set of requirements. And although the committee, I do believe, has a pretty good grasp of what LEAD is about. I think they have less of a grasp of mass chips, but that can be easily explained to them. And I think that they could be supportive of it. So, I also wanted to say, I think, and for that very reason, I thought I said earlier, I hope people heard me. I think there's a lot in here that is valuable, and I appreciate that LEAD appears multiple times in this document. And I would expect, I mean, I can't predict how it would turn out. I would expect that the school committee policy would in fact specifically call out LEAD, but maybe not only LEAD, maybe mass chips as well. Anyway, that was it.
Lisa?
Yeah, I just want to add, I guess, as far as the LEAD, I guess the policy wise, we want to know from the town, do they want the LEAD of gold certification or silver? And then we take it from there to spell out the details of the design and the architect. And that's how I see the policy is stop right at the level of what is the level that the town wanted to achieve, and the rest follows with the details later. That's all I wanted to say. You know, if it's with the mass chip, what is the what's the level of achievement the town wants to have it, and the rest follows later during the design.
Okay. So Ken, thank you for, I'm sorry it took so long, and I mean, to get you on the board here. But I think this was a good conversation anyways.
And thank you, Josh. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thanks.
Colleen and Todd.
I do want to say though, just so we're clear right now, we are not net zero ready school at this point until we figure out how we're getting and all the calculations are done. I know it keeps on, there's been a few publications saying we're net zero, but we're only ready in the design at this point till we figure out how we're doing the canopies and how many we need. And that's the goal, but we haven't signed any of that at this time.
So though it's late, maybe that's as good of a point. I mean, I know we need to talk about next meetings and so forth.
Yeah.
But by my sense from that whole discussion with Charlie and the team earlier around, solar and PPA versus investment, my two takeaways are, Charlie has said by midsummer, we really need to have an understanding. But you just heard from Meg tonight that if we're going to own this, it's going to require an action of town meeting. That's not likely to happen in the spring because the warrant closes in 4 days, and I don't know that we even have enough information, to pull that together. But that is something that I think can, and if the Energy Management Committee has an opinion about, ownership versus PPA, you guys have an important voice to sort of move that along, because it's not the school committee that's going to advocate for owning it. That is, I think that's really just outside our wheelhouse, unless Frank disagrees. So, we are committed to making it happen and get the solar on site. Absent the commitment and the resource to own this additional solar by default, it has to be a power purchase agreement. And I would absolutely be advocating for that. And I don't see any barriers to the school committee objecting to a power purchase agreement.
Thank you, Chris.
That was all.
Okay. We're going to move on. Next meeting dates, March 20th, which will be the civil. That's going to be a mostly civil on that call, except for probably some bills and a meeting minutes. But other than that, no high school or anything. We got to get through civil on there. And then we have April 10th and the 24th, which will be regular meetings. And Chris pushed us all the way out. So we have May 1st and May 15th and June 6th and June 19th. So
just a reminder to everybody, there's still no direction from Beacon Hill. So it is looking more and more likely that our last fully remote meeting would be March 20th. And Frank has, generously agreed to make Parkhurst available for us. So that meeting on April 10th is a really important meeting. That's our Parkhurst Award. So we'd need to have a quorum present. But that we would pivot towards, the old days we used to meet, or pre-COVID, I guess I can say old days, that was a long time ago. We used to meet at Town Hall. We've got more technology available to us if we meet at Parkhurst in the school committee meeting room. So that would be our plan. That's good for WinCam. It's also good for, Charlie and Vivian and the rest of the team. So they don't physically have to be with us. They can actually sort of zoom in and present to us on the screen.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, motion to close.
So moved, 8:43.
All right, thank you, Chris. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mac. Frank? Lisa?
Aye, sorry, Jay. Aye.
Okay, Brian?
Yes.
Todd?
Yep.
Geetha? John? I think he dropped off. Colleen?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
And Emily?
Yes.
All right, thank you, everyone. Sorry we went so far over, but
and Jason,
good
Josh,
conversation.
And Ken, thanks so much.
And right, have a good week.
And we'll try to get any information we can get out early for that meeting on the 20th. We will do so if Charlie can make some of that available to us just to look at beforehand, but we don't know what that looks like yet. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Night.